And we can start. So our topic today is labor issues during quarantine period. As you already know, quarantine period will last till the 24th of April, and most probably it will be prolonged by our government. Therefore, all labor matters during quarantine are still on trend. Today I will talk about main labor issues that employers use during this period, namely, it's remote or distance work, part-time work, idle time, paid leave, and also unpaid leave. We will discuss what is the best option for the employer in labor issues during the quarantine period, how to act within the law, and how to prevent any violations that could lead to fines and litigations in the future. I read that it's something wrong with audio and someone don't hear me. And now it's better? Yes, everything is okay. Okay, so I will continue. During our webinar, you are welcome to write your questions in the chat, and in the end, we will have small Q&A session. Before we start our discussion, I want to draw your attention to the following important point. As you know, the situation in the country is changing rapidly, and employers have to make quick decisions regarding labor relations with their employees. Recently, a number of new laws were adopted. These laws are aimed at supporting business during quarantine period. And when making labor decisions, the employer should remember that none of the recently adopted laws provides any mitigation or cancellation of liability for violations of labor law. Yes, we have new law number 530 as of 17th of March that has established just a temporary moratorium on inspections by controlling bodies, including the State Service of Ukraine for Labor. However, after the end of the quarantine period, mentioned State Service for Labor will renew its inspections, and employers will have to hold responsibility for violation of labor law in full during the period of quarantine. And by the way, now we already have information that the State Service for Labor examine complaints and applications regarding violations of labor rights that in future may become grounds for inspections of the employers. Therefore, during quarantine period, it is important to make and perform all labor decisions in compliance with the law. Let me start from the first situation when during the quarantine, the business continues to operate in ordinary course. In this case, the employer must fulfill its duty to organize the safe working conditions. The employer must provide the employees with personal protective equipment if needed, of course, antiseptic, disinfecting agents, of course, free of charge. Also, the employer can arrange transport of the employees to the place of work and back. What is important here that it is the right, not the obligation of the employer. If your business continues to operate in ordinary mode, it is advisable to issue an order on non-admission to work the employees with signs of infectious disease, and also to determine the actions of the employee and the employer in case of detection of any signs of illness of the employee. Also, the employer should inform its employees about recommendations of World Health Organization, the Ministry of Health of Ukraine on measures preventing the spread of coronavirus at the workplace. Also, the employer whose business operates in ordinary mode can establish flexible working schedule. Now we have new law dated the 30th of March that allows employer to establish such flexible working hours. So the employer can officially change the schedule of work to more comfortable during quarantine period. But the basic condition is to observe the established standard of working time. Let me remind you that it's 40 hours per week. So flexible working schedule may include fixed time and also shift working time. Fixed time means time during which the employee must be present at the workplace and perform his or her duties. The working day also can be divided into parts. Shift working time is time when the employee can be out of office. You should know that flexible working schedule doesn't entail any changes in the task setting, remuneration, and also it doesn't affect the scope of labor rights of employees. However, during the quarantine period, employers tend to use other opportunities provided for by the labor legislation. And let's move further to our first option. It's remote or so-called distance work. It's the most common quarantine employment arrangement, especially for white collars. Also, I will mention that previously the remote work was governed by quite outdated regulations. Its Soviet regulations dated 1981, and also quite general provisions by the International Labour Organization Convention on Home Work. But fortunately, now we have new laws, the new law number 530 as of the 17th March was adopted, and this law prescribes the following. The employer might instruct the employee to perform the work defined by an employment contract at home for a certain period of time. Also, the other law was adopted, the last one, on the 30th of March, according to which the Labor Code was for the first time supplemented by the term remote work. What does it mean, remote work? It is the work which is performed by the employee at his place of residence or any other place of his choice by means of information or communication technologies. You must know that during remote home work, employees allocate their time at their own discretion, so they are not subject to internal labor regulations. The total duration of working time may not exceed the statutory standards. Let me remind you, it's a standard 40 hours per week. It's a general rule. Also, the remote work doesn't entail any limitations in the scope of employees' labor rights. It means that the remote work is paid in a full amount by the employer in a manner prescribed by labor law and also by labor contract if it is concluded. The general rule is that the employment contract for remote work must be concluded in writing. However, the law stipulates some exceptions. Namely, at the time of epidemic, pandemic, the condition of remote work may be established without a written contract. Therefore, we can make a conclusion that the employer is entitled to establish remote work mode, which is obligatory for all employees. Such decision shall be issued by an order in which the employer should define legal reasons for establishment of home work mode and also the duration of such mode. But our strongest recommendation is also to receive written consent of employees regarding remote work mode for the following reasons. The point is that in this case, the workplace of the employees is being changed from the address of the office to their home address. And according to our labor code, one of the obligations of the employer is to define the workplace of the employee. Therefore, when establishing the home work mode, it is advisable to specify in writing for each employee a home address where employee will perform his work. Also, if you have a written employment contract with employees where the address of the workplace is stated, it is necessary to draw up an additional agreement to this contract where a home address for quarantine period shall be specified. Now we receive a lot of questions from our clients, and one of the most common is the following. How can we know that our employee is honest and diligent and he performs his work duly? The answer is the following. In order to control the employee's performance of the duties when they work remotely, when they work home, we recommend to issue a separate order where you can determine the way in which tasks are assigned to the employee and the way how employees should report on the work done. For example, the employees can receive their tasks by corporate mail and send a daily report on their performance to the manager also by email. Also, please keep in mind that the remote work, as we already discussed, is paid in a full amount by the employer in a manner prescribed by labor law and also labor contract. Let's move to our next option. It's part-time work. Really, it's very popular among our employers. In order to reduce the salary costs, employers are interested in establishing part-time work. Because in case of this option, the salary is paid in proportion to the time worked. You should know that a part-time working day or a part-time working week may be established either when hiring an employee or later. Also, it is important to remember that the code provides for that the part-time work is an essential condition of work, of which the employee must be informed by an employer 2 months in advance. But this rule does not apply if part-time work is established at the request of the employee. Therefore, if you need now quickly limit the standard 8-hour working day to, for example, 4 hours, you as an employer must obtain the employee's written application. And only after that, the employer may issue a relevant order on the new work mode. Such order shall clearly specify a work schedule indicating the time when work starts and when the work ends. Also, please take into consideration that the employer cannot refuse some categories of employees to establishing part-time work. It's such categories as pregnant women, women who have a child under the age of 14, or a child with disability, including a child with a disability is under women's care, or those who take care of a sick family member. Those categories can't be refused on establishing the part-time employment if they request it. Okay, I think it's okay, everyone hear me, and also you can see the picture. Okay, our next option is idle period. Quarantine may result in the employer's decision to suspend work, or in the other words, to declare idle period. Establishment of idle period is relevant for businesses, the activity of which has been directly forbidden by the decision of state authorities. It's restaurants, cinemas, shopping centers, sport clubs, etc. Labor Code defines the idle period as suspension of work caused by lack of organizational or technical conditions necessary for performance of the work by unavoidable force or other circumstances. Let me remind you that under the new law number 500 30 as of 17th of March, quarantine was defined as force majeure circumstances, so like unavoidable force. What is the advantage of establishing the idle period? Main advantage is that such decision doesn't need to be agreed with employees. An employer's order will be sufficient. Please note that in such order, an employer should identify the reasons of idle period, the duration of this period. For instance, you can establish it till the end of the quarantine and relevant restrictive measures. And also, in this order, the employer should specify payment of idle period. I think it is important to note that the idle time can be established for the whole company as well as for its individual divisions, units, departments. Until recently, we have a lot of disputes over the payment of idle period. You can find a lot of articles in internet on this matter. And really, the labor code prescribed that during the idle period, when there arose a production situation that is dangerous to the life or health of the employees or to the people around him and to the environment, through no fault of the employee, his average salary remains. But the latest changes to the code, it's law number 540, that came into force on the 2nd of April, this law clearly stipulates that the idle time during the quarantine period is to be paid at least 2/3 of the employee's salary. So now we definitely know how should the idle period be paid. However, it is quite necessary to pay attention to the collective agreement if it was concluded in your company, because it may provide for another procedure for payment of idle time, not through the fault of the employee. But the general rule is 2/3 of the employee's salary, not least. Our next option is paid leave. During the quarantine period, an employee may exercise his right to paid leave, which has not been used before. This can be either a basic annual leave, its standard duration amounts to 24 days. Also, it can be additional annual leave. The leave for work with harmful and difficult working conditions, leave for the special nature of work, and so on. Also, employee may take so-known social leave, for example, leave for employees who have children or adults with a disability since childhood. The general rule is that the paid leave is granted at the request of the employee and shall be processed, documented by an order of the employer. Also, let me remind you that according to Labor Code, the days of the employee's temporary disability certified in due course are not included to his annual leave. In this case, the employee's annual leave is extended by the number of days of the temporary disability. One important note: no later than 3 days before the start of the leave, the employee must be paid wages for the time of leave. If an employer fails to meet this requirement, the State Service for Labor can impose fines on the employer in the future. I think it's a basic information you should know about paid leave. And the most interesting option for our employees is unpaid leave. This option is the most advantageous for the employer. The legislation envisages a possibility of providing an employee with unpaid leave. But just like in case with the paid leaves, the employer cannot force the employee to take the unpaid leave. Such leave anticipates the consent of the parties. It means the employees submitting an application and the employer issuing an order. Forced leave without pay can be regarded by the controlling authorities as a gross violation of labor legislation, for which liability, including criminal liability, is provided. Also, you should know that according to Labor Code, according to the law of Ukraine on leaves, the unpaid leave can last no more than 15 days per year. But recently, the new law, number 530, as of 17th of March, prescribed that in case of establishment of the quarantine by the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, the period of an unpaid leave is not included to the general term established by the law. What does it mean? It means that the employer is allowed to provide the employee with unpaid leave for the entire duration of the quarantine period, but certainly with the consent of the employee. Please note that according to the law of Ukraine on leaves, the mother or other person who takes care of a child is obligatorily granted an unpaid leave for taking care of a child under the age of 14 for the whole period of quarantine within the relevant territory. Also, I want to pay some attention to dismissal during quarantine. It is worth to mention that the fact of quarantine itself cannot be a ground for the dismissal of employees at the initiative of the employer. We all know the consequences of unlawful dismissal. It's reinstatement of an employee at work, collection of salary during the forced absenteeism through the judicial procedure. As well, it can be imposition of fines by the State Service of Ukraine for Labor during the control of compliance with labor law. But at the same time, quarantine can be the ground for certain changes in the company's structure. For example, cutting some positions, and this can be grounds for dismissal. But in any way, an employer should follow the procedure of dismissal, which is quite complicated and take minimum 2 months. I think that discussed options are main information that you should know. Also, I want to emphasize that Ukrainian labor legislation is quite obsolete. Our labor code is inherited from the Soviet Union. It was adopted in 1972, and this code protects, first of all, rights of employees, not employers. Moreover, Ukrainian courts also take a side of an employee as a more weak and less protected party in labor relations. So it is highly advisable when making any decisions regarding labor relations during quarantine to negotiate and come to an agreement with your employees. Because, as you noticed during our discussion, almost all options in labor relations require consent of the employee. Let me remind you the point we already talked about, that none of the recently adopted laws provides for any mitigation of liability for violations of labor law. And after the termination of quarantine period, the employer will have to be fully responsible for violating labor legislation. That's why it's crucial to make all labor-related decisions in compliance with the legislative requirements. We will be always happy to assist you, and please find our services and also for your convenience. You can find us in Facebook, LinkedIn, and other messengers. Please follow us and find all necessary information just in your phone. And I see that we have some questions. Okay, let me answer them. Can the employee be subject to disciplinary liability if he doesn't come to work on time during quarantine? First of all, you should know that one of main conditions for bringing an employee to responsibility is its personal fault in violation of labor discipline and the absence of good reasons for it. So the violation of the discipline has been due to good reasons in the form of measures related to the introduction of the quarantine. So the employer has no grounds to apply disciplinary measures to the employee who is late because, for example, there is no transport during to the restrictive measures, because in this case, it's not the fault of the employee. And also, I want to share with you some thoughts regarding most common questions from our clients. And one of them is, how can employers combine different options? For example, do employers have possibility to establish remote work on part-time working conditions? Really, employers can combine different options that we discussed today. For example, the employer can establish remote work on part-time working conditions, but we know that it is important to receive a consent of employee for part-time work. Also, employer can combine such options as, for example, establish idle period for one department and to establish remote work mode for other units of the company. It is not forbidden, and if it is comfortable for the employee, it definitely can be done. I think that this information was maybe new to you, and thank you for your attention. Take care of yourselves and have a nice day. Bye.